Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining another oiip event. Tonight's topic is the Eastern Question Revisited. And the idea of this event is to have a historical perspective on the ongoing power shifts and struggles in Southeastern Europe. As most of you might know, the Eastern Question was one of the major questions of the 19th century. Power struggles between emerging European powers such as Russia, Germany, and then regional powers such as Austria-Hungary, but also others like the Brits and the French were involved. And it was more or less about how to divide the territory of the decaying Ottoman Empire. So the lust for more territory influence was triggered by the retreat of the Ottomans. And by the way, the Eastern Question was also one of the effects of the Eastern Question and the struggle for power in the Southeastern European region was that the Ottoman Empire was included into the so-called Concert of Europe, if you like, a early international organization that aimed at dealing peacefully with the problems and power strives of these different nations. So we're going to discuss whether and how these historical power struggles have a continuity. Do we find the same powers being involved in a fight over influence in the region? Or is there a change? Are there breaks? If so, what kind of changes can be observed? What kind of breaks can be observed? What role does Russia play? This is, of course, of particular interest nowadays in view of the Ukraine war and as we see also growing Russian ambitions in countries such as Serbia or Bosnia-Herzegovina to gain at least influence over media coverage and to promote its own worldview. But then we have other actors that are also historical actors such as Turkey, the successor of the Ottoman Empire, if you like, has become more active in the region over the last years. And there is also an economic fight, if you like, over influence between Western powers and these historical non-Western powers, but also new ones that have been added to it, such as China and others. We are going to discuss these questions today with these distinguished guests. And let me introduce you to them before we start into our debate. In front of me is sitting Zeynep Arkan Tuncel. She is a visiting fellow here at the oiip and a associate professor at the Department of International Relations at Hacettepe University in Ankara. And she has various and many publications. And one of them is also dealing, is part of a special issue that is dealing exactly with this question. Next to her is sitting Philipp Theer, a professor of the history of East Central Europe at the University of Vienna and the founder and head of the Research Center for History of Transformations. And he has also many publications. One of his most recent books, correct me if I'm wrong, is Die Ordnung auf dem alten Kontinent, eine Geschichte des neoliberalen Europa. And in 2019, he received the Wittgenstein Prize from the Austrian Science Fund, FWF, for his work. Next to him is Muammer Bećirović. I hope I'm... Sorry? Bećirović, I'm so sorry. Muammer Bećirović. He is the author of the book Clemens Wenzel von Metternich oder Das Gleichgewicht der Mächte. He previously worked as an editor for Forbes Business Magazine and currently works as a communications consultant in Vienna. And his book on Metternich explores exactly the power games of that era. And next to me is my dear colleague and friend, Vedran Cihic, a senior researcher at the OIP, lecturer at the University of Vienna, and a non-resident fellow, senior fellow at the Center for Transatlantic Relations, School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, Johns Hopkins. He has also numerous books, articles, and analysis, and very soon his book, most recent book, Uncommon, will be published. Well, thank you all for joining. And let me start, if I may, with the first question to you. We see a rising Russia again, and Russia trying to regain its influence in the region. If you could give us a broader overlook, a historical perspective, do we really see the same as we saw in the 19th century, or where are the differences? What needs to be? I mean, it's easy to make historical comparisons, but usually they're a bit flawed as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here. It's the first time. I'm very glad to be here and to represent also Reset. For your question, I'm mostly a social historian, but in the recent book, How the West Lost the Peace, a history of the great transformation after the Cold War, I had a chapter on, so to say, great power relations. I mean, one of the problems in the whole debate, I think, but this is maybe an imposition impossible to escape, is that all this is called geopolitics, a term maybe not invented, but certainly internationally popularized by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. The double name also tells something, of course, right? And this is always thought as a zero-sum game. So if the one great power or the one country gets or grabs, in the case of Russia, mostly grabbing something, then the other side is losing. And I think this is one of the tragedies that, in the multilateral post-89 peace order, the thinking was different. Right? That there would be mutual profit, strengthening cohesion, and that there might be something what is termed a win-win situations. And however, if you have one actor stuffed with a lot of nuclear weapons who declares a war, but that kind of actor can also impose this kind of thinking. So then it becomes a brutal competition of great powers fought out in various zones of war. And I think the real problem is that, so that is one about, my concern about geopolitics every time I hear it. The other thing is, of course, if you believe in Russia and say, okay, let's make a compromise somehow, it's very difficult with an actor who wants to take everything, then obviously if you'd have a concept of great powers, this is what they are proposing and what also China believes in, the multipolar world order, which is maybe inevitably coming because of decreasing economic might of the United States. Well, if you have it, and if you look at the 19th century, and now we come to your question, then what you are going to have is always tensions, conflicts, and then sometimes wars at, so to say, the fringes of those imperial empires or imperial zones of influence. And I think this is the constellation in the Eastern question, right? You have great powers, one being the big winner of the war, of the Napoleonic Wars, Russia, obviously, the other one, Great Britain, and then other empires as well. And okay, multipolar, so it's always under tension and always some, trying to get more influence here and there. And I mean, when the question came up, and this is why I say grabbing, Congress of Vienna, it was not given that Russia would take what was later called Congress Poland. So it's not only in the southeast. They also take a large chunk of Eastern Europe, nowadays Central Europe. Why? Because the army is standing there, so they can take it. And then there's other bad surprises at the Congress of Vienna, and poor Metternich has basically not much of a choice than to make a compromise. But the compromise actually being made is that this is then the major empire in Europe. Moving forward in other areas, in the principalities, the protectorate. We have had so many protectorates in history, but so the protectorate over the principalities, meaning Romania. So moving also in that direction. And there's not much which could be done. Eventually something was done. The Crimean War, when the other European powers thought, this is getting too much. Now, historical analogies are always problematic because with what do you compare, with what kind of purpose? What is the deeper meaning of a comparison? It's always a construction of sorts. And so many historical analogies go wrong. But anyway, what are we having in the war against Ukraine? It's not a Ukraine war, because this puts kind of the blame on the country. It's like minority problems. Okay, then the minorities are the problems, you chase them out. It's a war against Ukraine, if I may correct it or be haircutting maybe exact. Then, what can one do? But obviously the concept of great powers, there's one more. The superpower, still, America being involved. There's another new player who was not that present in the 19th century. But maybe the constellation is comparable in the sense that there's UK, France, Germany, to a degree Italy, trying to confront Russia before it marches on. Because these are the threats on the table. I mean, you've also heard what Putin tells about Poland. We know Ruski Mir, what the patriarch then is saying. It's all on the table. And then Ukraine is just a start. So this is the problem. But coming back to the analogies, there seems to be a long-term drive towards this expansionist imperialism. Sorry to say, maybe I'm too much of a Central European because part of my family comes from what was once called Bohemia, so then Czechoslovakia. So there we go. And it goes again and again, every around 30 years. And we are now confronted with this situation, and Austria claims to be neutral and ask for peace. I've heard it on the 1st of May. It's difficult.
What would you say?
Unfortunately.
Is it ideology? Is it religion? Orthodoxy? Why is this strive for more influence, more territory of Russia, and what role do the Balkans play in that thinking?
Now, the political scientists, please correct me and add or add something smarter or maybe more up to date. I think, the good old imperialism theory is there. And one of the basic explanations was that every time an autocratic regime, especially if it is under pressure or even threat, of course, Russian elite also thinks it's under outside threat because so many countries have joined NATO. I always stress they have joined, not NATO has expanded, which is of course also a result of that. Then the internal tensions have been brought to the exterior many times before. So that has happened before. So I think the good old imperialism theory can explain part of it. But what does the abstract model then tell us about the concrete case, and what is Putin saying, trying to communicate, which is one thing, and to do, but I think there's something to it, isn't there? Since he has large internal trouble to 1113 when he ascended his anti-constitutional third term, since then inner tensions are exported abroad. So that is one. The other one, as a historian, I mean, I kind of defended Putin in the 1990s because there, I think, was a brief or anti-imperial moment in Russian history when they did not expand and didn't want to. For example, Yeltsin, it's hardly known, but Yeltsin could have taken Crimea in 95 because there was an autonomist pro-Russian movement winning the elections. By the way, with a pretty large margin. So that would have been the opportunity. They wanted to serve Crimea, and Yeltsin said, nah, let's not touch post-Soviet borders. Kuchma, Ukrainian president, also reacted in a smart way. So this was the brief moment, but since 1999, I think everything is moving into the other direction. And there's various phases, 2007, the Open Declaration, 2014, attacking a neutral neighboring country, which also means that you badly damage any vision of neutrality as established for Ukraine. I mean, they were not member of military alliance, and still territory was taken. So that's all, and then it goes on and on and on. Where and how to end, I don't know, because I'm a historian and not trained in prognostics. But you guys must know that, right? You're better trained in that.
Can I pass the question on to you? How does the power game, if we speak in these terms, look like today and in a historical perspective? Do you see continuities or do you see breaks?
Yeah, surely. I think not that much has changed, to be honest. If you look, the West is the same as an empire as Russia is. The question is how they execute it. The United States, by gaining friends and allies and economic prosperity, giving freedom to the countries, but still being hegemonic. Especially over Europe, until this day. Russia has the different approach because they don't have the resources to do it like the Americans. So I would clearly thinking of Russian has always been imperialistic, but it was the same as having a sense of mission in the world, being a special people. The same as the Germans thought themselves before the two world wars and giving it up. The French are thinking that they are universalists and have a special role in the world. So I don't think that the Russian imperialism is that far from the other ones. It has its own style of executing, but it is quite... everyone tries to gain influence and to widen it. And about the game, I think I would say the United States is the first empire, as far as I know in history, which tries not to force up the rule upon other people, but to try in first line to win them economically and by giving more carrots than sticks. Previous to all empires before the German Empire, Nazi Deutschland, Napoleon, Louis XVI, Karl V, they all tried to conquer. But the Americans, I think, have the smartest way of gaining such huge zone of influence, and the Russian clearly the most brutal one. Yeah, I think that has changed. But in regards to the play, it is the same as has been in the 200, 300 years ago.
I mean, since you wrote a book on Metternich and we are here in Vienna, what role does Austria play in the region? I mean, the Habsburg Empire was back then a huge force, of course. Now Austria is a small country, but with, if you like, big ambitions when it comes to Southeastern Europe. It considers itself as one of the kind of leading countries when it comes to expertise of this region. So what role would you say does Austria play?
Getting the Germans on the table. To be honest, I think that's the only approach if you want to get order on the Balkans. The Germans always ignored the Balkans until this day, still. Bismarck once said the Balkans aren't worth one bone of a grenadier, of a Pomerian grenadier. So he didn't like the confrontations in this region. He didn't care, just holding up everything and not blowing up the region. So the Germans never really have a big interest in the Balkans in regard to the imperialistic terms. Austria had. For Austria, I think the role could be nudging the German in a certain direction. For example, we are too much speaking about European integration, giving them this or that. I think it's the wrong approach. The Western Balkans first need order, territorial order, and then European integration. And the biggest thing they can do is nudging the Germans into that direction to confront especially one power which still tries to dominate the Western Balkans, not necessarily by cooperation but by force, is Serbia. What I don't understand about Serbia quite is, maybe my prof can tell me surely more about it. It is already the biggest power there. It's double the size of Croatia, it's double the size of Bosnia, quite more of it. So they don't need really to dominate the region being so forceful to the neighbors. But they are. And the only power which clearly can make a stop to it and being an Ordnungsmacht in the region and has the potential to do it is Germany. Austria can nudge it in its way and support it that way, but clearly the Germans are the only ones which have the resources.
Okay. Zeynep, let's talk about Turkey's role in that region. Back then, in the 19th century, it was a decaying power, the Ottoman Empire, but has left certainly some traces. So what, in your opinion, is Turkey's role today, and do you see any continuities with the past?
There are some continuities, of course, and I'm not a political historian, by the way, so I'm basically skipping over them to talk more about the differences, actually, not only in terms of Turkey's approach towards the region, but also in terms of the region today and the region back then. So, first of all, obviously there are lessons to be drawn about. The lessons to be drawn from history. What I would like to highlight more today is that, I mean, as an international relations scholar, I think that the system is very different compared to that of the past. So mainly my focus will be on the differences, firstly at the systemic level, and then I will talk a little bit more about the difference at the level of Turkey and Erdogan, maybe. I think the European order that we live in today is very different compared to that of the past, to be honest with you, because we no longer live in the balance of power days of the concert of Europe. Today, I believe that the European, as the collective representative of the international rules-based order, defines the rules of the game in a way. And its engagement or disengagement, even, I mean, its actions and non-actions matter in shaping the dynamics in the region and in shaping domestic as well as international issues and interactions. I would like to quote it's a 20-year-old book, but the Barry Buzan, Olive Wever book on regional security complex in that regard. And they said, it is in the hands of the external powers to force the Balkans into the European complex. They were meaning the European security complex, of course, but from a more order-based perspective, I believe it's still in the hands of the external powers, and the key external power in this regard is the European Union. So it's shaping the region into a sub-region of Europe. That's what I would argue. So the EU's engagement, disengagement, credibility, effectiveness, the ability of the EU to fulfill its promises towards the region, I think they matter the most in that sense, especially in comparison to an external actor like, I mean, Turkey does not call itself an external power, but an external actor like Turkey, I would say. So a revitalized enlargement policy on the part of the EU would change a lot of things, which is not the topic today, but I mean, that's what is needed, I would argue. On top of these systemic differences, I would argue that the actors that are involved in the region are a little different compared to those of the past. Today we're talking about competing actors in addition to the waning superpower on the other side of the Atlantic. We're talking about EU, we're talking about Turkey, a regional actor with certain aspirations. We're talking about Russia, which is categorized in many respects as an actor that is threatening the rules-based international order. And we're talking about China, which is in a way unique externally. It's an external power. So we're talking about many different actors with very, very different backgrounds and motivations engaging with the region in a different way. So again, style matters. So the style in which they engage, are involved in the region matters, because today we're not talking about power interests in the same way as we did 100 years ago. Today, interest, power, hegemony, even influence is defined in a different way. Mainly thanks to the EU, by the way, in terms of European dynamics. So when we're talking about Turkey's contribution, for example, Turkey is a very limited actor compared to the other actors that are competing for influence in the region. But Turkey nevertheless enjoys a certain sense of engagement because of its soft power tools and soft power means and non-traditional agencies that are actively implementing Turkey's foreign policy or AKP's foreign policy on the ground. So it is different today because of the ways we pursue this foreign policy, because of the ways we exercise this foreign policy and implement it on the ground, I would say. So again, I'm sorry, but for me, I'm not a political historian, but the way I see it is that the region today is very different.
You mentioned limited actor. In which sense? Economically?
Economically and politically, especially in the last, decade, but more or less 5-6 years or so, because of the domestic issues to do with the political situation in Turkey, increasing authoritarianism and increasing unemployment, everything, and economic problems, obviously. So Turkey's domestic problems, I mean, this was interesting when Davutoğlu, as foreign minister, and then the prime minister, was arguing in favor of Turkey's expanded role as a regional and then possibly a global power. He always mentioned this: domestic success equals foreign policy success, and that is not the case anymore. Foreign policy is usually used as a tool in the hands of the political elite, the AKP elite, as a mobilizing tool, but Turkey does not have the capabilities that it did a decade ago in that sense.
And yet it is investing in religious sites, mosques that are built, social housing in Albania, and so on and so forth. So there is still a rather seemingly big presence of Turkey. Where, in which areas, and is it only identity or and religiously connoted identity that is the tool?
That largely owes to the tools that Turkey uses, because it has limited capacities in terms of its political influence. Again, in terms of its economic influence, I mean, it's competing with the EU and individual EU member states in the region, and Turkey does not have that economic sort of capabilities. So what it can do, and it can do that really well, it engages with the actors, with the societies on a more sort of bilateral, tailor-made basis through its different agencies. But these agencies, like the Yunus Emre institutes, like Marif Foundation, like TRT, the state-owned broadcasting company, like Anadolu Agency, it's engaging with different levels through different means, mainly following the government's line, so mainly following the Erdogan AKP line, But it has a different sort of effect. One thing that we talk about when we're dealing with foreign policy making is that sometimes the coalitions that bring you to the government, that make you win an election, are not the ones that keep you in power. And that has been the situation in Turkey, of course. The coalitions, domestic coalitions that brought Erdogan to power has changed. They have changed over the years. And today the coalition that is keeping Erdogan in power is the religious/nationalist domestic coalition with Erdogan's close alliance with MHP, the Nationalist Action Party, and Devlet Bahçeli. So I would say the religious/nationalist rhetoric works, and it exists as the main tool that they use because they don't have that many options at the moment.
Thank you. Vedran, so towards the end of the 19th and beginning of 20th century, the Balkans turned into Europe's power keg. It was, not by surprise, the First World War began after an incident there because of the rise of nationalism and radical movements and so on. So my question would be, do you see any analogies between today's development? We see again a rise of nationalism, and back then also Russia was somehow involved. Do you see similarities or do you see more differences? And if so, where are the similarities and where are the differences?
Yeah, I took so many notes while you were speaking. I think just before I come to your question, it's in this kind of a sea of actualism. We just focus all the time on actual events and what's happening tomorrow and what's going to happen today and who is going to say what. I think it's really interesting to go back and then to think about basically analogies and similarities. And I think we can learn a lot of from the history. And speaking, about that particular period. And the moment when the Balkans basically exploded or contributed to the explosion of the First World War. And going back to the 19th century, I think what we see is, of course, the nation-building processes going on in the region of Southeastern Europe, speaking of Bulgaria, Romania, but also on the territory of former Yugoslavia, speaking about Croatia, speaking about Serbia, to a certain extent Macedonia, but in different circumstances. And I think there is one interesting similarity. So when you look at the constellation of the 19th century and the coalition or alliance between Serbia and Russia, and the way how Serbia basically, or the conservative national elites of the 19th framed the nation-building project of Serbia in the 19th century around the notion of Great Serbia, Velika Serbia. Croats responded with Big Croatia that then ended up in a horrific crimes of the Second World War. But actually the idea that there is a need to conquer territory and to gain territories in the neighborhood, to be big, that's gained traction in the 19th century and became a kind of a part of the Serbian national project back then in the 90s. It's very much utilized on of course, of the national identity built on mythology. So on the role of religion and going back even to the 14th century and the Battle of Kosovo, and it created a kind of metaphysics of the Serbian nation, to put it that way. So because we all the time speak about rationality and power politics and interests, but there is also sometimes metaphysics in it. And today we just jump over the centuries. And we saw then in the late 80s the rise of the new Serbian nationalism that went back actually to the 19th century. So when Slobodan Milosevic came to power and the Serbian Academy of Sciences in 1986 published a memorandum on how to basically resolve the situation in former Yugoslavia, they really went back in terms of ideas and notions back to the 19th century, to this notion of Great Serbia, claiming that all the territories where the Serb live, including Vienna, Vienna is this third biggest Serbian city, if I'm not mistaken now, globally. But basically the notion was copied and pasted into the new constellation of the 19th century. I mean, not to forget that in all of those kind of nation-building processes, you will have a certain fight between national conservative metaphysics and some kind of a liberal notion of a society, so which wanted to promote, like, constitutionalism and open up for free elections, etc., etc. That happened in Serbia also in the 70s and the 80s of the last century. So there was a kind of a fight within the Serbian elite between the liberal wing and the nationalist wing. But in any case, it ended up in a tragedy. So basically, the rise of the new Serbian nationalism and the new metaphysics of Slobodan Milosevic, of the Serbian nation under Slobodan Milosevic, led to a tragedy. But what came in addition to it, and that's quite interesting, that will bring me to Vučić in a second, the notion of nationalist appeals combined with very concrete interests, sometimes interests of clientelistic circles around Milosevic, of this kind of a patronage system that was built up, sometimes interests of mafia and closed circles, etc., etc. And they actually, I mean, the 90s in Serbia were, on the political side, an authoritarian system run by a kleptocratic, clientelistic patronage system of Slobodan Milosevic. So that was gone as Milosevic lost the war. I mean, that was kind of the West showing up, not Germany, but led by the United States of America. And the 1999 war of the West against Milosevic Serbia, I have to emphasize, not Serbia, but Milosevic Serbia, led to a defeat. And here comes the European Union as a big power. So basically the promise of European integration and the promise of democratization, etc., etc., that ended up in so sometimes we refer to this notion of imperial overstretch, but I would argue that there was a kind of a liberal European overstretch when it comes to the Eastern neighborhood. And what emerged on the fringes, and that's, I think, a very important notion, the fringes, when someone is sneezing in Washington, D.C., we have an earthquake in the Western Balkans, probably, or I mean, at least in Berlin. And I think this kind of a liberal overstretch of the European Union and the notion that the EU and Germans just believed, like they did with Russia, that extending the density of connections and trade and preaching the values and offering this kind of a normative notion of a better life, that this will succeed and be enough. And it came differently. And now that brings me to the final answer to your question. Basically, I see a kind of a new reconfiguration of this kind of a concept of metaphysical concept of Greater Serbia popping up again today. It's now coined, I mean, it's quite interesting, Ruski Mir you mentioned, which is a kind of a Russian world, and behind that stands Russian imperialism. And we have a kind of a new concept born in the last few years, which is called Srpski svet, as the Serbian world, actually, promoted very much by a guy named Aleksandar Vulin, who was running the secret services. Previously was a Minister of Interior of Serbia and then Minister of Defense. Then he was put on the sanction list of the United States of America. And now, in the last configuration of the Serbian government, Vučić took him again and put him into the government, in a way showing a middle finger to the West and sending a clear message that he doesn't want to play along the rules that the West is defining right now. And I think this is now a kind of a difficult but also dangerous constellation that reminds very much of some constellations of the 19th century. I mean, Serbia now is the, when it comes to the military power in the region, putting huge resources into military. It threatened Kosovo last year, directly or indirectly through the paramilitary forces on 24th of September 2023. And the big question is basically what the West, if we have a kind of a new competition of powers, etc., what can the West put in on the fringes in the Western Balkans while being preoccupied and struggling with the support to Ukraine facing the Russian aggression. So I think this is a kind of a interesting new constellation. And to finish, I think behind this metaphysical concept of Srpski svet stands again something that Vučić borrowed from Milosevic from the 90s. And this is a very dense network of clientelistic, semi-criminal structures running on controlling the society and obviously pushing Serbia towards authoritarian rule and misusing or using history and historical appeals basically to create an argument for his power, and also going back to some sentiments from the 19th century, like pan-Slavic, Russian Brotherhood, Serbian Orthodox Church, etc., etc. He just yesterday, I mean, just to finish, he joined forces with Milorad Dodik, who is his counterpart in the Republic of Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And before both of them, or Vučić, I think both of them embarked on a plane to travel to the United Nations in New York, where they want to fight the Srebrenica resolution of the United Nations. They went to visit the Patriarch, Porfirije, and to get the blessing for what Vučić described on Instagram. Obviously, there was no Instagram in the 19th century, but today he has this tool of communication too. And I just read it before I came here. The type of metaphysics that he reproduces on Instagram, so telling that Serbia is a pride nation, and now again someone, the West, is pushing us and pressing us to accept something that we don't want. We're going to stand up. We're going to form a new alliance of nations, appealing to this kind of Eastern Bloc. And we're going to show that we are a pride nation, which really reminded me of the vocabulary of the 19th century, basically.
Thank you, Vedran. I would love to have a short second round, but please keep your answers short. And I'd like to start with you, Vedran. You mentioned this Grand Serbia, desire for Grand Serbia, and this was actually also one of the causes then leading to World War I. In the Balkan Wars, it was greater Bulgaria against greater Romania against greater Serbia. So how much of a kind of threat do you see, or is that, I mean, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine has potentially opened a new door, because we thought that sovereignty and borders are kind of cemented, right? We are after the age of kind of challenging these things. Do you see any tendencies in the region that is connected to this strive for greater Serbia that is also challenging the sovereignty of neighboring states? Is that anything you would see as a threat?
Look, I mean, there is an obvious threat. Milorad Dodik from Republic of Srpska is basically on a daily level threatening secession from Bosnia and Herzegovina. He wants to leave the country, and he openly says once the constellation is right, and the right constellation will be the rise of far right in the European Union, defeat of Ukraine in Ukraine, election of Trump to the White House, then we can go for what we always wanted to have, joining or rejoining Serbia and creating a kind of a larger Serbian state, including obviously Montenegro and north part of Kosovo. I think the threat is here. The threat is here because we have two new constellations that we haven't had in the 2000s and 2010s. The first one is basically that the international rules-based order, or liberal world order, with all the institutions like the United Nations, is a bit up to the air. So when Vučić now travels to New York to fight what the international community and the rules-based order has ruled as genocide in Srebrenica, it's a kind of entering a kind of open competition and sending the message that this rules-based order doesn't count for him. So basically, this is one constellation. The second is something that Muammer alluded at, and that's the question how big is then the naivety in the Western capitals still born in the 90s and practiced through the 2000s and 2010, that basically the promise of the European integration, rule of law, democracy, we all love democracy, Americans love democracy, why, for God's sake, the Eastern Europeans and Southeastern Europeans should not love democracy, and this kind of a certain belief that there is an automatism leading us towards the final ultimate goal of liberal democracy, human rights, etc., etc. And I still see, at least when it comes to the Western Balkans, a bit of this naive hope of the European Union that normative appeal combined with economic, with money, is going to do the miracle. And all the facts are simply showing right now that this is not doing the miracle. So basically the EU integration doesn't work. 35% of the Serbs support the EU integration, 70% does not. All the countries are far from membership in the European Union. So that's like, I mean, if everything would go fast from today onwards, it will take them 10, 15, 20 years basically to join. And we still have like these two big open questions. Question of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is challenged now by the Serbs, partly by the Croats, and the question of Serbia and Kosovo, which is basically a kind of an open wound in the Western Balkans. So I think based on these two reasons and the fact that China and Russia are pushing into the region, the Chinese president just visited Belgrade and Budapest, and together with Paris, and together with the rise of new authoritarianism, I think the threat is imminent, and we should not be, at the West, should not be too naive to believe that everything is just going to be the same like it was the last 2 decades. Yeah.
Thank you. Philip, Pan-Slavism was mentioned. How much of Pan-Slavism, first of all, maybe how important or influential was Pan-Slavism in the past, and do you see any effects of it today? Because when Zeynep talked about Turkey's how Turkey tries to take influence in the region through the channels to the various, isn't that reminiscent also of how Russia operates in the region, spreading information, culture, religion? So
that's a very good question. I think any kind of pan, big Germanic, Slavic, Southern Slavic, I think that is pretty much dead. What you have is the remnant of these, grand imperial projects. And even in pan-tourism, of course, there's Turkish speakers near Lake Ohrid and in Prizren, and I even profited from that once in a trip. But I think that's not the issue. But you have these, smaller or larger scale imperial projects. Now, when can they come to fruition? And I think either by brutal force, that is one possibility, by surprise or not so much surprise attack, like in 2014, and then now escalation on a larger scale, 2022 in the southeast. I mean, I agree with Währinger, and I also would be very worried. Worried is the European Union is always worried. Concerned.
We are concerned.
So if I'm concerned as a scientist, then maybe I'm a bad scientist. But anyway, and as a historian. But if you then have the EU not really making the step into it because of overstretch or maybe interior resistance, right? The constitutional referenda in France and in the Netherlands, 2005. So this kind of sent a stop signal. Okay, so they are not really engaged. America is getting weak. Turkey has economic trouble, so it can't engage as much as it used to do. Then this is a classical power vacuum. And then what can one do with the classical power vacuum? If you're a smart Chinese president, you fly there. And it was a smart move, wasn't it? I mean, first Paris, making some bows, but then to his friend in Budapest, and then to the other friend. I mean, whether the friend can rely on the small friend, I mean, physically taller, can rely on that friendship that much, I'm not so sure. One day, maybe not. And then how to bring military equipment or, for real warlike situation. But very visibly, there's a power vacuum. And power vacuums always get filled somehow. Usually in these kind of constellations, again, another historical analogy, but by revisionist powers who don't necessarily want to take all, but some. And maybe something could be done against that. But I don't know the interior situation of Montenegro because I don't consider myself any specialist on the Balkans. I only did it for specific research objects. And I don't really follow, daily politics of, let's say, Montenegro. I can't do everything. But then, I mean, why not take Montenegro into the European Union now, right? I mean, does one always need the 10-country package?
Yeah.
Why not take one? Then Serbia is at least landlocked and Montenegro would be secure, right? So that would be a real blockage to regional grey powerism. Or why not take in Albania? So I think there's always space of maneuver, I mean, for filling kind of a power vacuum, not maybe the whole, but is there any understanding of these strategies? Are they?
No, Montenegro is an absolute front runner. So there's a new government in the EU and the US. They have an ambition to push Montenegro basically to be the next in the line, and to. I just said that Montenegro is the next in the line. Basically, it's now
and then jump the line.
Changing government, it's considered as the most promising candidate. The government itself is sending the message that it wants to rush. And it has the best preconditions. I mean, it's a small country, 650 population. It has euro. It's part of NATO, as we haven't talked about NATO. So I mean, it's part of the region is in the NATO alliance. So I think this is one line of thinking in Brussels. Yeah.
Muammar, looking from the region, because we've talked a lot about like the influence of different powers on the region, so as if the region itself doesn't have any agency. I mean, we talked about Greater Serbia and ambitions for that, but there are also others in the region. Do you see in this constellation, current constellation, most of them are NATO members, as Vedran mentioned. Most of them are candidate countries to the EU. And yet there is apparently some tension. You said, you mentioned it also previously. Does it have an economic dimension? What would you see as one of the reasons? Why is this region still, I mean, it seems to be, they seem all to be candidates to the EU and NATO members. Why is there a power vacuum and tensions?
I would wholly agree with. I think that's different from the 19th century. There were not power vacuums. So as soon as you left one place, someone stepped in, at least in the Balkans.
Serbia, autonomous.
Yeah, autonomous for a smaller period of time. So 5 years, 10 years. But really they were, the Balkans right now clearly have a power vacuum for...
So it was faster, the 19th century, in terms of power game?
Yeah. Far faster and far more consequential. That was most struck me in researching the 19th century was the small players, as soon as they get independent, start to think like the big ones. That was quite fascinating because everyone surprisingly had an idea of being big. Serbia had one, Bulgaria, Romania, as you mentioned. So everyone tries it. And Serbia, I think, is just the country which cannot live without it, at least the political class. It clearly has a metaphysics to it. But the economic impact, I would not over exaggerate it. When you ask yourself, the country which can really balance the region wholeheartedly is Germany, but just not willing to do it.
Why Germany?
Because it has the resources, and it's not far away geographically.
But it has a history in the region which is not very positive, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it depends to it. I think when you go to Serbia, surely, I think in Bosnia would be a different case. When you ask yourself, could really Germany, if it wants to, if it has a clear political line of strategy and executing it, bring changes to the Balkan in the rule of law, in economic side, clearly could. But they don't really enforce it strongly. What do I mean by it? Foreign investments. I mean, Germany is in all those countries number one. So why couldn't you use this pressure and get something done on the political level? The US, if they want to, could disturb the Balkan politics in 24 hours with the special agencies and the military might they have. We are not even thinking of it. Every time, for example, we're letting, especially in Serbia's case, they speak all the time about either getting back to Kosovo or getting the Republika Srpska. But nobody even tried. Maybe they are minorities in Serbia, which can you push against Belgrade? We're not trying even to balance them on these issues out. That's something I can understand that which says, well, I can play each side out because Germany allows it. But it can close this gap. It just has to want it and execute it. I mean, you can find different political ways to do it. Economic cooperation, even sending some troops in Bosnia. I mean, there are European troops stationed there, Kosovo as well. But right now, when you talk with the Americans and the Germans are doing the job, mostly. And as soon as Taiwan is acute, this whole region, and even, I think, Ukraine, will be left to us. And you can ask in Berlin if they have a plan. They cannot even differentiate between the Balkan people at all. Really. So
they have to ask Austrians.
They have to ask Austrians. Well, clear cut. So I think as Vedan and has mentioned, it's clearly we live in a times where everything can again happen. Everything is possible. Not that not in regard to a major escalation like the World War I case, but surely a bigger conflict. And we are visiting. We are living in front of it. History is flowing.
Well, on that bleak note, I move to you, Zeynep. How important are the Balkans for Turkey's foreign policy? There was in the early years of the Republic this statement, I don't know if it's true or not, by the first foreign minister of Turkey who said something like the death of, the cold of a peasant in the Balkans is more important to us than the death of a prince in Afghanistan or the Middle East. I don't remember. So apparently, in the early years of the Republic, the Balkans had a high priority, also considering the fact that there are many people who emigrated from the Balkans to Turkey. It has a huge population with a Balkan background. So how important is it to Turkey nowadays? And does Turkey cooperate with the EU in the Balkans, or is it is it more a rival to the EU?
Okay, let me start a little bit with this. Excuse me in advance, but from a Turkish perspective, I would say the Balkans is of vital significance for Ottoman foreign policy and for Turkish foreign policy, because I mean, that was the only way to expand the empire in the early days of the Ottoman Empire. because of geographic and religious reasons, the Ottoman Empire sought to expand its borders, and the other neighborhoods were a little bit too troublesome. So Turkey, also the Ottoman Empire, sought to expand this way. And in that sense, the Balkans was its gateway to a broader geography. And that situation really did not change in the early days of the empire, not in terms of expansion, but it was of vital importance again for the young Turkish Republic. And I would argue that it was, I mean, people usually talk about the Ottoman heritage in the Balkans. I think sometimes people actually miss the other side of the story, because the Balkans had a huge impact on how the young republic was shaped as well. And not only because of the population, not because only of the leaders. It was a breeding ground for the young Turkish leaders like Mustafa Kemal and all that. And it's also because it served as a model for national identity formation, especially in terms of the emphasis on a pre-Ottoman past and the blurring or the othering of the Ottoman past, because this is what Turkey did as well in the early years. The Turkish identity was very much based on not maybe denying the Ottoman heritage, but putting it in a secondary place, I would say. I mean, we have a long history, and the Ottoman Empire is just one part of it. So that was interesting. And the Balkans was an important region because in the early days, the ultimate consideration was stability and security. After what the Ottoman Empire and Young Republic experienced in the aftermath of the First World War. So the Balkans was needed. I mean, stability in the Balkans was needed for stability and security in Turkey. So it was a foreign policy priority. But in the early years of the Republic, Turkey Turkey was basically a status quo power, because it just wanted to maintain stability in the region. It just wanted to make sure that, it didn't pose a threat, didn't have the capabilities anyway, but didn't pose a threat to its neighbors on the outside. So it just wanted to protect its stability and security beyond its borders. So it engaged in a lot of bilateral relations, alliances like the Balkan Pact and all that. What changed afterwards was, first of all, there was a breaking point in Turkish foreign policy in the mid-1960s. In the aftermath of the decision to remove the Jupiter missiles from Turkey, the Cuban Missile Crisis and the infamous Johnson letter, Turkey's engagement and intervention in Cyprus. So there was a break because Turkey experienced a serious sense of isolation in the international environment. As a result of this, Turkey wanted to make sure that it would complement its security beyond its over-reliance on the US and NATO. So it started to look for different partners. It started to follow a more multi-dimensional foreign policy from the 1960s onwards, which matured in the 1980s, especially under the premiership of Turgut Özal and all that. And this came to a peak point under the AKP regime. And the intellectual leadership of Ahmet Davutoğlu, of course. So strategic debt and all that. Many has been written and said about this, so I'm not going to go into the details of this. But Balkans has always been an important region, what we call part of gönül coğrafyası, the AKP's. Turkey's heart and soul geography, and the Balkans is a very important part of Turkey's heart and soul geography, gönül coğrafyası. It is still the case today. And I think it's this foreign policy objective is not only towards the Balkans in general. Turkey is trying to build itself as a regional power in different geographies as well. Like when we talk about the Balkans as a battleground, we can also talk about Africa as a battleground in that respect. And Turkey is competing with different actors, again, to a limited extent, in different geographies around the world. And this is mainly built on Turkey's desire to, in a way, punch above its weight. And to reify its imperial background, reify its imperial sort of identity, which again has come to be more and more emphasized under the AKP regime, of course.
And is that in rivalry with the EU, or does that go in line with the EU's interests in the region?
So when push comes to shove, I would say it doesn't go contrary to the EU's desires, because Turkey never really challenged the EU in that regard. Turkey is a candidate state, and Turkey obviously is not going to become part of the European anytime soon, but Turkey never vocally went against this. Turkey supported the Balkan countries' endeavors become candidate countries to join NATO. So this was never openly challenged by Turkey. And Turkey itself is a NATO member country, and NATO membership obviously occupies a very important place in Turkey's national identity.
And we saw it can play a role with Swedish membership.
That's Erdogan's gain, actually. We talk about the religious, nationalist connotations, references, and foreign policy, but ultimately, I think the strength of Erdogan and his foreign policy lies in his flexibility. And that flexibility owes to his, first of all, domestic constituents. There is this sort of cult of Erdogan as a leader, because until now he was seen as irreplaceable. There was no alternative to Erdogan. No one can people, put their faith in and vote when they went to the polls. So today, I think that's starting to change maybe a little bit. But yeah, I believe that's the situation, and Turkey in that sense is more, I would say, like an ally to the EU, not so much a regional contender.
Thank you all. I would now like to open the floor. If there are any questions, please come forward. Yes, please. Could you quickly introduce yourself and then pose your question?
I'm just interested in politics.
Just a second, maybe, because for the recording, the mic is important.
I'm just an interested citizen, an interested Austrian citizen. And I would like to ask you, I haven't heard anything about China. Somebody mentioned Taiwan. Could you say anything about this? What about China playing there? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions so that we could combine one or two? Yes, please.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's working. No.
It is.
It is.
It is. Okay. I was missing a bit what was and what is obviously the general topic, what I've been reading, and you have been firstly mentioning about some kind of a comparison about what was the situation in the 19th century and what it is now. Okay, so you have been talking now very much about the Balkans. So this has been some kind of a side issue in the politics of the great powers in the 19th century. What was the great issue was, of course, some kind of Central Eastern European area, specifically Poland, of course, with the very beginning. And later on, of course, the discussion on a very much bigger area concerning the difficulties on Russia, of course, with England on different areas, which was, of course, in Persia, which was in China, and in different other areas. And I have been very, very thankful about, of course, talking also a bit about history. Mr. Djic, specifically concerning the background of what was and is still, of course, the Serbian big metaphysics in this. But again, we do not have to forget concerning also where we are now concerning Russia, and the difficulties and, of course, horrendous moments concerning the war in Ukraine, which has been the bigger plate concerning the Russian feelings and also metaphysics, which partially also had their grounds in 1812, which had their parts partially also their grounds in 1845 to 1846, as we know, and of course, then finally, not to forget the what was it, 22nd of June 1948. Okay. By the way, and people are
Sorry to interrupt, but do you have a question tied to that,
yes,
or is it more a comment?
Yes. This is what I wanted to ask you, whether or not you wanted to stress a bit more on that.
The historical
dimension. I only also might simply draw your attention also on an American historian, James Goldgeier. I don't know whether you know him. He has been writing 2 essential books on NATO enlargement. Please look on it in internet, have a reading in it. It has been done very, very carefully. Brookings Institute, and let me potentially later on know about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Interesting discussion. I'm Daniel Spichtinger, also I would say here in a capacity as a concerned citizen. Maybe my question would be directed primarily at the visiting fellow from Turkey. And I found it interesting the way that you describe Turkey as, a NATO member and also primarily not against the European Union. Because maybe here we have sometimes a different impression, the way that a couple of years ago the whole migration crisis was used to gain money and concessions, and maybe most recently also when we talk about the war against Ukraine and the fact that Turkey has not imposed sanctions on Russia, but rather it seems to me like sometimes it's said Mr. Orban is sometimes accused of being pro-Putin, and then the answer is no, he's not pro-Putin, he's not pro-EU, he's just pro-himself. Maybe is that also something that you would say of Mr. Erdogan?
Very much so, yes.
Thank you. One last question, or are we good with these three questions? Who would like to go first? I mean, there was one question directed to you. Turkey, not a rival, but a partner of Europe. Really?
Well, not necessarily an engaged partner, but in terms of overall policy direction, yes. But I think it's mainly because of the exact reason that you mentioned. Because the problem with Turkey is, until maybe the Davutoğlu era, it was quite easy to assess Turkey's foreign policies and criticize these new Ottoman dreams. Okay, but the problem with the Erdogan leadership, basically after 2016, is that it has no backbone. That's what makes it so easy to get results, because it's very negotiable, it's very flexible, so very pro-Erdogan, as you said, because the only instinct that I think shapes Turkish foreign policy right now, the only motivation is for him to be in power, to remain in power. And he is doing whatever he can to secure that, and foreign policy is a very important tool in that sense. But ever since Turkey became a member to NATO, NATO membership has been a backbone of Turkish foreign policy, which has, which has been put in a secondary position at times as a result of certain conflicts, as I said, during 1960s, 70s, but it's still relevant. And today, when Turkey's formulating its foreign policy choice, it's always within certain limitations because of that. But I think the same applies to Erdogan. The right thing that you mentioned, pro-Erdogan, pro-Orban, the same logic. They need to be in power, especially today after the recent local elections, because now there is a viable alternative. Now there is a way out of the AKP rule. So it might be possible for him to get even stricter in terms of certain foreign policy choices.
Thank you. Vedran, do you want to respond to the China question, and we leave the history part to our two historians?
China has emerged as a competitor in the Western Balkans, at least in Eastern and Central Europe. I mean, just the latest visit that you mentioned to Hungary and Serbia is a proof that China is here to stay. What China does largely is investing in economy, infrastructure, but at the same time, the type of investment is a very toxic one. So it basically directly confronts the EU rules and regulations, be it in the field of environment or tenders, etc., etc. And it serves, I mean, not directly, but indirectly, it serves the incumbent elites, basically. So it gives resources into the hand of, let's speak about Serbia, into the hands of the Serbian Progressive Party and Aleksandar Vučić to feed the clientelistic circles with some of that kind of a toxic money that's fleeing. And that's significant because China overtook the overall EU in terms of foreign investments last year in Serbia for the first time. So basically, China has overtaken Germany and all the other countries, and that's definitely huge. But then the more important question regarding China, and that goes to whole Eastern and Central Europe, I mean, the question is, how is China going to promote the political model? And is China going to have and to find proxies, starting from Hungary and Serbia, where China found proxies in Vučić and Orban, and how that is going to be continued. And I think we should not overestimate the hidden, but I think long-term political ambitions of China, not in basically overtaking as a primary power, but basically planting the seeds or supporting something that is becoming certain mainstream in parts of on the fringes, but not only in the fringes, which is this kind of a competitive, chameleon-like authoritarianism, combining open economy, a neoliberal understanding of trade, etc., but at the same time, strong and very repressive rule and control of the country. And so this is where this becomes tricky, if China ends up being confronted with a weakened European Union and the model of normative model of democracy, European integration, liberalism, human rights, the weaker the EU is, the stronger is China probably going to be. And then what might become a kind of a frequent case, and this is an anecdote from the latest Eurovision Song Contest, 2024, when Serbia was competing the semi-finals to enter the finals of the Eurovision Song Contest, Xi Jinping landed in Belgrade, and the state broadcaster stopped the Eurovision Song Contest to go in real time to the airport, to Nikola Tesla Airport in Belgrade, to show basically Vučić hugging his brother Xi Jinping. So basically, there's also kind of a certain soft power that China has started to exercise. And then if you go and stop the Eurovision Song Contest, you should never do. That's a kind of a small anecdote. But on a serious side, it's China is a competitor. It's a competitor, yeah.
But by just visiting Belgrade, he has kind of honored, yes, of course, Belgrade.
On the day when 1999 the West attacked and bombed and destroyed the Chinese embassy in Serbia.
We can expect a more self-confident Vučić now.
Yeah.
To the bigger historical picture of the power game that was not only, of course, limited to the Balkans, but had global implications. There was this question how do the Balkans fit into this bigger game?
Okay.
Great Britain.
I mean, when I look at Russia as a historian, especially from an Austrian perspective in the 19th century, Russia up till this day has always had two faces, and you never knew which face the Russian ruler put on. What do I mean by it? There were periods of Russian history where they were a status quo power. They were. At the same time, maybe 5 to 10 years change and they're being expansionist again. When we look up to the Russian conflict today, we cannot really tell. Even Sarot wrote a beautiful book on the NATO enlargement. Why did he do it? Was he really scared of losing Ukraine as a zone of influence and about security issues? Or did he really want to expand? So we don't know really the answer because we cannot look into his heart or into his brain. And the same was the case in the 19th century. Russia, you have to have the capabilities to deter it and to balance it out, but you cannot go on a conflict with Russia over a long period of time. You have to bind it towards yourself. That's the key lesson for me from Metternich. you cannot fight Russia on a long period of time, but you can engage it into diplomatic confrontations and diplomatic engagements, because as soon as they leave the table, they're more aggressive and more making more troubles than when they're on the table. So I think from our perspective, it was quite the biggest mistake. We can ask this question. It's quite fascinating. As soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, there were really three approaches how you can handle this. Eastern Europe. First, you leave it neutral buffer zone. There is the risk Russia could expand into it, and there is our potential to expand into this buffer zone. So neither the case, we would have confrontation at any time soon. The second was to bound it, to take Eastern Europe and bind it to the West, what we did. But the risk was there to make Russia quite angry because of it. But no one really tried a third approach by getting Russia into the club. By getting Russia into the club in a European security system, a second one, we would not discuss, I think, this topic today, because we would have the capabilities to balance Russia from the inside, but not from the outside. Russia balancing from the outside was always difficult. But from the inside it was quite possible, but we really didn't try it. I think it was a mistake. And it was a mistake from Metternich could do it until 1848, but his successor didn't, even until 1914. Yeah, quite to learn something.
Philip, I will do a last round, like lessons learned from the past, but maybe if you could...
I thought this is the last round.
No, just two sentences from each of you. I will ask for you for your assessments, like what are the lessons to be learned, but talking about the bigger power game.
The lessons to be learned. I mean, Vladimir Vladimirovich is teaching us a lesson how wrong lessons can be taken. But anyway, he, as an amateur historian, he pretends to take a lot of lessons. And in terms of NATO expansion, here I don't agree. I think this is, American mistakes, Iraq and so on. But basically, I think it's not a question that, the West took it for a variety of good and understandable reasons. They wanted to be out of the reach of a country which was becoming quite aggressive on an everyday level already at the turn of millennium. Boycotts at the border, import restrictions on this and that. So constant mistreatment. I've had it with students, Polish students, how they were treated in a cooperation I had with Russia was unbelievable. And people make this experience at the border, at the visa, trade, and then I think they are looking for a safe haven. Now, the bad coincidence, sometimes history is full of bad coincidences, was that unfortunately this coincided with other actions, like, Kosovo War and then above all Iraq. So open break of international law. The taking in the new members and other actions. And so in that way, maybe Russia had a reason to feel threatened. But, where does it lead us? This assumption that somebody has the right to feel, I think it is very difficult. I was asked to come back to these historical questions. Okay, well, how to deal with Russia? There was an older approach. Poland, making alliances with various boyars, conquering Moscow, staying in there for a number of years. The rest you can see in very nice, which I really like, Russian opera. Boris Godunov, Жизнь за царя. They managed to do it. So find internal allies there, break the oligarchy by bringing some of the oligarchs in your side, and then see how to handle. This is why one of the reasons why Putin hates Poland so much, because they managed to do that. he reads all about that. NATO, I was also mentioning, referring to your question. I know Sarote, I don't know this book yet, I took a note, but I think it is a sequence of, so to say, coincidences, but not real planning. We want to expand and get Eastern Europe and all that. They didn't want it. In 91, if you see all the broadcasts, they are talking about the Visegrad 4, okay, they are considered part of Europe, the rest is not really an American picture. Coming back to historical analogies and differences, I think, at least on one level, we are beyond the Eastern question, and that is good, and maybe a future source of strength, so at the present a source of weakness. At the time, the Eastern question was also an agreement about 5 large powers, most of them Western European, also Russia was considered as European back then, that they can expand into all sorts of areas. This was a deeply imperial, if not imperialist, and in parts already colonial or colonializing approach.
In parts?
Well, sometimes yes, but sometimes then suddenly they accept the independence of a country like Greece and so on. So then you suddenly get an exception of the rule because of various historical myths and. But yes, colonialist. Yeah. And nowadays, I think this element is missing, except Russia. I think it is not, in this neo-imperialism, you also find a revival of a lot of colonial ambitions, internally, of course, who is sent to the war fronts. And I'm also not sure, China with this, give a credit for indirect investment, it also has not had this phase of self-reflection after decolonization, and so that might bring them to some trouble. On the other hand, what I've learned from the discussion today was that Europe is maybe acting too weak, right, and not imposing power, which maybe it should do. With a player like Vucic, who is it's a larger nation in the Balkans, but how many million people? The GDP. No access to the sea, so isn't it somewhat limited? But then somebody playing pretty large, big power games. So maybe that would be a way to handle it. But then that would be back to more Oriental question kind of proceeding, right? Impose the power you have. Don't be shy of behaving. Imperialist and maybe sometimes in a colonial fashion.
The question has been before also specifically from you, Mr. Petrovic, whether or not the thinking of this, in the meantime, crazy man in Moscow was at the beginning more as he has been taking it as a threat, or whether or not he was trying to be some kind of, again, imperialistic. The narrative now, which is overall in the whole Western country, is easy. It was purely imperialistic from the very first moment on. And this is a question, furthermore, specifically under historic historic prerequisites.
I think we're already beyond our time. Maybe we can leave that question to right after the event. There might be some chance to exchange on that. I have just one last request, because we are beyond time. Just one sentence. Do you see any lesson learned? I know, because that was in our that was the aim of this whole undertaking. Like, what can be a lesson to be learned from the past? One, max 2 sentences. Vedran, can I start with you? And we go.
I mean, it depends where we look, but I think in the Western Balkans the lessons were not learned, simply because the traction towards democracy and liberalism has evaporated right now, and we are back in almost a kind of constellation of the 19th century with the rise of nationalism and this kind of a metaphysical, even irrational sentiments combined with authoritarian power. So I think we are facing an imminent threat in this very small region I mean, should not forget that the Balkans altogether, taken all the Western Balkans, 6 countries taken together, are less than GDP of Romania and are
You're just entering the 10th sentence.
17 and 18 million population. That's it.
Thank you.
It was too long sentences.
It's very long sentences. Short sentences, please, too.
Yeah.
What are lessons learned, or aren't there any?
No.
No lessons learned.
No lessons learned.
Okay.
Not really, no.
Optimistic. Huh?
Is there anything we can learn from the past? Let me reformulate, Philip.
I mean, as a more with a view on contemporary history, I would answer that at least the West has learned some lessons in 22 compared to 2014. Whether it will suffice, we don't know. If there is a power vacuum evolving, don't let it be filled by anybody else. But that would be the simple lesson. I have another lesson, but this is more self-advertisement of my institute. I will relate that to the very end.
No, please go.
Okay. All right.
It's only 2 sentences.
If it's just 1 or 2 sentences, it's okay.
In 2 weeks, the institute I established a couple of years ago, and Wolfgang Petsch has been with us. We will have our annual Social Science and History Research Festival on the campus, Courtyard 1. So it's June 4 to 6 this year on green transformation. And there's a tent, you can come and go. So we took over the model of an Orthodox church, right? No sitting. The old utopia of an open university for 2.5 days. So please come. Reset, you can find everything on the webpage. It's Reset 80. 2 ways to remember. Either exchange the P with an T, so it would be Recep. Erdogan, but then replace P with T, or like a recept and then a reset, and then leave out the P. So
now you've entirely confused me. I don't know what to remember.
I'm going to send you the link.
So bad lesson, okay.
Zeynep, what's the lesson that should be learned?
That there is no room for naivety in European politics and Balkan politics and in broader world politics. I think we have been quite naive in believing that the system that we had was sustainable. I mean, I'm not commenting here as a Turk, as a pan-European citizen, let's say, but I think we were naive, and that there is no room for that anymore.
Thank you. Thank you all for your contributions. Thank you for your contributions as well, and for bearing with us. And see you hopefully at another event of our institute. This event was streamed, so if you want to promote it to others, please advertise it. We will also promote it through our social media channels and on our website. Thank you so much, and good evening.